The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop in front of the general store, nearly throwing Grace Anderson from her seat as snow whipped through the small Montana settlement of Hecla, the kind of blizzard that made even hardened miners pray for mercy. Grace clutched her carpetbag tighter, peering through the frosted window at the white curtain obscuring everything beyond a few feet. She had traveled 2,000 miles from Boston to marry a man she had never met, and now the final moments before that meeting felt suspended in this frozen limbo. The driver's muffled shout barely penetrated the howling wind, but she understood the message. This was her stop. Her fingers trembled as she fastened the top button of her wool coat. It had seemed substantial enough in Massachusetts, but here in the Montana Territory in January of 1878, it felt as thin as muslin. Taking a steadying breath, Grace pushed open the door and stepped down into knee-deep snow. The wind hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and sending her bonnet flying despite the ribbons tied beneath her chin. Strong hands caught her elbow before she could fall. "Miss Anderson." The voice was deep, steady, cutting through the wind with quiet authority. Grace looked up into a face weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of summer sky that seemed startlingly bright against his tanned skin. Snow had already accumulated on the brim of his hat and the shoulders of his heavy coat. He was taller than she had imagined, broader too, with the kind of solid presence that made everything feel slightly less terrifying. "I am Grace Anderson," she managed, her teeth already chattering. "Owen Ellis." He touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "I have been waiting in the cold for you." There was something in the way he said it, not accusatory but rather like a statement of fact, a declaration of what he had been willing to endure. His hand remained on her elbow, steadying her against the wind. "I am so sorry," Grace said. "The train was delayed in Chicago, and then again in. Come inside before you freeze." Owen took her carpetbag with one hand while keeping his other arm firmly supporting her. "We can talk where it is warm." He guided her not toward the general store but to a small building adjacent to it, a modest structure with lamplight glowing golden in the windows. Grace stumbled through the snow, her skirts growing heavier with each step as they absorbed the moisture. By the time Owen pushed open the door, she could barely feel her feet. The warmth inside hit her like a blessing. A pot-bellied stove radiated heat from the corner of what appeared to be a combination office and living quarters. Papers covered a desk near the window and a narrow bed occupied the far wall. Everything was neat, organized, decidedly masculine. "Sit here." Owen pulled a chair closer to the stove. "I will make coffee." Grace sank into the chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. She watched as Owen moved with easy competence, stoking the fire, filling a battered coffee pot from a pitcher of water, measuring grounds with practiced efficiency. His movements were economical, purposeful, the actions of a man accustomed to taking care of himself. "You are the sheriff," Grace said, finally noticing the star pinned to his vest beneath his coat. "Town marshal," Owen corrected. "Not quite the same thing, but it amounts to similar work. Did my letters not mention it?" "They did." Grace felt heat rising in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the stove. "I am sorry. I am not usually so scattered. The journey has been longer than I expected." Owen hung his coat on a peg and turned to face her properly for the first time. He was younger than she had imagined, perhaps 28 or 29, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was handsome in a rugged way, all strong bones and defined features, but it was his eyes that captured her attention. They held a quiet kindness that made something in her chest loosen. No need to apologize. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. "You came a long way. That takes courage." Grace wrapped both hands around the cup, absorbing its warmth, or desperation. The word slipped out before she could stop it, and she bit her lip, wishing she could take it back. But Owen just nodded slowly, settling into the chair across from her. "I suppose we are both desperate in our own ways," he said quietly. "Otherwise, we would not be in this situation." His honesty surprised her. In his letters, Owen had been cordial but reserved, outlining practical matters like his income and living situation without revealing much of himself. This direct acknowledgement of their unusual circumstances felt like an unexpected gift. "I should be honest with you," Grace said, setting her cup down carefully. "I am not entirely what you might have expected. None of us are." Owen leaned back in his chair, studying her with those steady blue eyes. "I am not expecting perfection, Miss Anderson. I am just hoping for partnership." "Please call me Grace. Grace." He said her name like he was trying it on, seeing how it fit. "And you should call me Owen." Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the windows. Grace glanced toward the door, remembering the blinding white curtain of snow. "Will we be able to reach the church tonight?" Owen followed her gaze and shook his head. "Reverend Miller lives 3 miles out of town. We would freeze before we made it halfway. This storm came in faster and meaner than expected." He paused, then added carefully, "I have a room at the boarding house 2 buildings down. You can stay there tonight. I will sleep here. We will sort out the wedding when the weather clears." Relief and disappointment warred in Grace's chest. Part of her wanted to get the wedding over with, to settle into her new life and stop existing in this liminal space of uncertainty. But another part was grateful for the reprieve, for the chance to catch her breath before committing herself irrevocably to this stranger. "That is very considerate," she said. "It is practical." Owen stood and retrieved his coat. "But we will have to move quickly. The boarding house is close, but this storm is getting worse." He was right. When Owen opened the door, the wind had intensified, driving snow horizontally with brutal force. Grace could barely see the building next door. Owen wrapped a scarf around her face and neck, then took her arm again, anchoring her against the wind. The walk that should have taken 2 minutes stretched into an eternity of struggling through drifts and fighting to stay upright. By the time Owen pounded on the boarding house door, Grace was shaking uncontrollably, ice crusting her eyelashes. A stout woman with silver-streaked hair opened the door, her eyes widening. "Lord have mercy, Owen. Get inside." They stumbled into the warm interior, and the woman quickly shut the door against the storm. "This must be your bride. I am Mrs. Patterson. I run this establishment." "Grace Anderson," Grace managed through chattering teeth. "Poor dear, you are frozen solid." Mrs. Patterson immediately took charge, helping Grace out of her coat and leading her toward the stairs. "Owen, bring her bag up to the room at the end of the hall. I will get her warmed up and fed." Owen nodded and disappeared, while Mrs. Patterson guided Grace up the stairs with a firm, maternal grip. The room was small but spotlessly clean, with a real bed covered in quilts, a dresser, and a washstand. A fire already burned in the small fireplace. "Let us get you out of these wet things," Mrs. Patterson said, already unlacing Grace's boots. "You will catch your death." Grace's fingers were too numb to manage the buttons on her dress, so Mrs. Patterson helped her, clucking her tongue at the damp fabric. She produced a flannel nightgown from the dresser and helped Grace into it, then wrapped her in a quilt and sat her in the chair by the fire. "Better?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Much, thank you." Grace's voice was steadier now, though her body still shook with residual cold. A knock sounded, and Owen entered with her carpet bag, his eyes carefully averted. He set the bag down and moved toward the door immediately. "I will let you rest. Wait." Grace stood, clutching the quilt around her shoulders. "Thank you, Owen, for everything." He paused in the doorway, and when he looked back, something warm flickered in his expression. "I am glad you made it safely, Grace. We will talk more tomorrow." After he left, Mrs. Patterson brought up a tray of stew and bread, watching as Grace ate with obvious approval. "Owen is a good man," she said, settling into the other chair. "Came here 5 years ago, took the marshal job when nobody else wanted it, cleaned this town up considerably." "He seems very capable," Grace said carefully. "Lonely, though." Mrs. Patterson folded her hands in her lap. "Lost his family back in Kansas. I do not pry, but I know grief when I see it. He has been carrying it alone too long." Grace absorbed this information, thinking about Owen's steady presence, his careful courtesy. She had been so focused on her own reasons for becoming a mail-order bride that she had not thought much about his motivations beyond the practical. Now, she wondered what sorrows had driven him to seek a wife through correspondence, rather than courting someone locally. "I will do my best to be a good wife," Grace said quietly. Mrs. Patterson patted her hand. "I can see you have had your own troubles, dear. Maybe you can help each other heal." After Mrs. Patterson left, Grace lay in the soft bed listening to the wind howl outside. Her last night as an unmarried woman, possibly her last night as simply Grace Anderson. Tomorrow, weather permitting, she would become Mrs. Owen Ellis, would bind herself legally and spiritually to a man she had met only hours ago. She thought about the life she had left behind in Boston. Her father's death 6 months earlier had left her and her mother destitute. They had learned too late that his business had been failing for years, that debts consumed everything they owned. Her mother had gone to live with her sister in Philadelphia, but there was not room or resources for Grace as well. Her choices had been limited to working in a factory or accepting marriage to her father's former business partner, a man of 60 with wandering hands and a cruel reputation. The advertisement for mail-order brides had seemed like a third option, a chance to escape to somewhere new. Owen's letters had been honest and straightforward. He had needed a wife, someone to share his life in a small Montana town. He had promised respect, partnership, and faithfulness. He had not promised love, but Grace had long ago learned that love was a luxury, not a necessity. Still, she thought about his hand steadying her arm, his eyes kind despite the bitter cold, his quiet statement that he had been waiting for her. Perhaps there were worse foundations on which to build a marriage. The storm raged through the night and all the next day. Grace spent the time organizing her few possessions and talking with Mrs. Patterson, who proved to be a wealth of information about Hecla and its residents. The town had grown up around silver mines in the mountains, though the easy silver was mostly played out now. About 200 people called it home, a mix of miners, ranchers, and merchants. Owen kept the peace among them, settling disputes and occasionally dealing with claim jumpers or thieves passing through. "He is fair but firm," Mrs. Patterson said as they sat in the warm parlor, snow still falling thick outside the windows. "Men respect that. And he is not afraid to stand up to trouble, even when it would be easier to look the other way." Grace sensed there was a story behind that statement, but Mrs. Patterson did not elaborate, and Grace did not press. She would learn about her husband's life soon enough. Owen came by that evening, stamping snow from his boots in the entryway. His cheeks were ruddy from the cold, and snow dusted his shoulders. "Just checking that you are comfortable," he said, removing his hat. "Very comfortable, thank you." Grace rose from her chair in the parlor, conscious of Mrs. Patterson's interested gaze. "Would you like to sit? Warm yourself?" Owen hesitated, then nodded. He took the chair across from her, holding his hat in his hands. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, and Grace felt the weight of all the things they did not know about each other. I should tell you more about what your life here will be like, Owen finally said. I have a small house at the edge of town. 2 bedrooms, a main room with a kitchen area, a root cellar. It is not fancy, but it is sturdy and warm. I have been fixing it up these past months. I am sure it will be fine, Grace said. I am not expecting luxury. There is a schoolhouse if you wanted to teach. I know from your letters that you were a governess. Miss Harmon runs it now, but she is planning to marry a rancher come spring. She would likely welcome help even before then. Grace's heart lifted. She had not dared hope she might be able to continue working with children. I would like that very much. Good. Owen's shoulders relaxed slightly. I thought you might. I know this is not easy, Grace, marrying a stranger and moving to the middle of nowhere. I want you to know that I will do my best to be a good husband. I will not always be easy to live with. My work is sometimes dangerous and I can be too focused on it. But I will be faithful and I will respect you and I will work hard to provide for you. The sincerity in his voice made Grace's throat tight. I appreciate your honesty. I promise I will do my best to be a good wife. I can cook and keep house and manage accounts. I will not complain about the hardships. You are allowed to complain, Owen said, and there was almost a smile in his eyes. You are human, not a saint. This time Grace did smile. I will try to save my complaints for truly dire circumstances. Like February, Owen's lips quirked. It is colder than January, if you can believe it. I find that hard to imagine. You will see. He stood, turning his hat in his hands. The storm should break tomorrow. I sent word to Reverend Miller. If you are willing, we can marry tomorrow afternoon. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. I am willing. Owen nodded slowly, his eyes searching her face. No second thoughts. She thought about Boston, about the life waiting for her there if she returned. She thought about this solid, steady man who had waited in the cold for her, who spoke honestly about his flaws, who thought about whether she might want to teach. No second thoughts, she said firmly. Something shifted in Owen's expression, a tension easing that Grace had not quite noticed until it was gone. Then I will see you tomorrow, Grace Anderson. For the last time under that name, after he left, Mrs. Patterson appeared with knowing eyes and a satisfied smile. That went well. Does nothing happen in this house without your notice? Grace asked, but she was smiling. Not much, Mrs. Patterson admitted cheerfully. And I will tell you this, dear. I have seen Owen these 5 years past, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you just now. You give this marriage a real chance, and I think you both might find something good. Grace wanted to believe her. She wanted to believe that this leap into the unknown might lead somewhere other than just survival. But she had learned to be cautious with hope, to protect herself against disappointment. Still, as she lay in bed that night, she found herself thinking not about her fears but about Owen's steady presence, his careful consideration, the warmth in his eyes when he had said her name, perhaps Mrs. Patterson was right. Perhaps there was a chance for something good here. The morning of her wedding day dawned clear and brutally cold. Grace woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through the window, illuminating a world transformed into crystalline white. The storm had left 3 feet of snow, sculpting drifts into fantastic shapes against buildings and fences. Mrs. Patterson helped her dress in her best gown, a deep green wool that brought out the auburn in Grace's brown hair. It was not a wedding dress, but it was the finest thing she owned, carefully preserved through the journey. You look beautiful, Mrs. Patterson said, pinning Grace's hair into a neat arrangement at the nape of her neck. Owen will not be able to take his eyes off you. Grace studied herself in the small mirror. At 24, she was not considered young by marriage standards, particularly here on the frontier where women often married in their teens. Her face was too angular to be conventionally pretty, her mouth too wide, her chin too determined. But her eyes were a clear gray-green, intelligent and direct, and her hair had a richness to it when properly brushed. "I hope I do not disappoint him," she said quietly. "You could not possibly." Mrs. Patterson squeezed her shoulders. "Now, Owen sent word that he would collect you at noon. The Reverend will meet you at the church." Grace's stomach fluttered with nervous butterflies, but she nodded. She had made her choice. Now she would see it through. Owen arrived precisely at noon, dressed in what was clearly his best suit, a dark wool that emphasized his broad shoulders. He had trimmed his hair and shaved, revealing the strong lines of his jaw. When he saw Grace, he stopped in the doorway and she watched his eyes widen slightly. "You look lovely," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you. You look very handsome." Color touched his cheeks, and Grace realized with a start that Owen was as nervous as she was. Somehow that made her feel better. The walk to the church was difficult through the deep snow, but Owen held her arm firmly, supporting her weight when she stumbled. Other townspeople were out, shoveling paths, calling greetings. They watched with undisguised curiosity as Owen and Grace passed, and Grace felt the weight of their attention. "They mean well," Owen said quietly, "but I know it is uncomfortable." "I will have to get used to it," Grace replied. Small towns are like that. The church was a simple wooden building with a small steeple, unadorned but clean and well-maintained. Reverend Miller waited inside, a thin man with gray hair and gentle eyes. Mrs. Patterson and her husband had followed them, along with the shopkeeper and his wife and a few other townspeople. "Miss Anderson." Reverend Miller greeted her warmly. "Welcome to Hecla. Owen has been anxious for your arrival." "Thank you, Reverend. Shall we proceed?" The Reverend took his place before the simple altar, and Owen and Grace stood before him. Grace felt suspended in the moment, hyper-aware of everything. The cold air still clinging to her skirts, the faint smell of wood smoke and pine, the solid warmth of Owen standing close beside her. His hand found hers and his grip was steady, anchoring. Reverend Miller's words washed over her, familiar liturgy about love and commitment, about forsaking all others and cleaving unto each other. Owen's responses were clear and firm, his eyes never leaving hers. When it was Grace's turn to speak, she was surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. "I, Grace Anderson, take you, Owen Ellis, to be my lawfully wedded husband." Owen slipped a simple gold band onto her finger and the weight of it felt significant, real. This was happening. She was truly marrying this man. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Reverend Miller smiled. "Owen, you may kiss your bride." Owen's hand came up to cup Grace's cheek, gentle and warm, and then his lips touched hers. It was a brief kiss, respectful, but Grace felt the promise in it, the beginning of something that could grow into more. When they pulled apart, the small gathering applauded, and Mrs. Patterson was crying happily into her handkerchief. Grace felt dazed, her lips still tingling from that brief contact. "Mrs. Ellis," Owen said softly, and there was wonder in his voice as though he could not quite believe this had actually happened. "Mr. Ellis," Grace replied, testing out her new name. They signed the register, and then the small group moved outside into the brilliant sunshine. Mrs. Patterson hugged Grace tightly. "You come to me if you need anything, you hear?" "I will. Thank you for everything." Owen shook hands with the men, accepted their congratulations and probably ribald advice that Grace was glad she could not hear clearly. Then he took her arm again, and they walked through the snow toward what was now her home. The house sat at the eastern edge of town, a modest structure of log and plank with a shingled roof and a covered porch. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the windows gleamed with what looked like new glass. "I know it is small," Owen said as they approached. "It looks perfect," Grace said honestly. Compared to the tenement she and her mother had ended up in after her father's debts were revealed, this house looked like a palace. Owen opened the door and then, to Grace's surprise, swept her up into his arms. She gasped, grabbing his shoulders for balance. "Tradition," he said, and there was the faintest hint of a smile on his lips as he carried her over the threshold. Inside, the house was warm and surprisingly well appointed. The main room held a sturdy table and chairs, a sofa near the fireplace, shelves lined with books. The kitchen area had a good stove, cabinets, a dry sink. Everything was clean and organized. "You have been working hard," Grace said as Owen set her down carefully. "I wanted it to be ready for you." He gestured toward a door on the right. "That is the bedroom. I put your things in there earlier. The other room is smaller. I have been using it, but if you would prefer it, I can—" "Owen." Grace touched his arm, stopping the rush of words. "This is our home now. We should share the bedroom." He looked at her, searching her face. "I do not want to pressure you, Grace. I know this is all very fast. If you need time, we are married," Grace said gently. "I understand what that means." Owen nodded slowly. "I will try to be patient. I will try to make this easy for you." His consideration touched her. She had known men who would have simply expected their marital rights without thought for her comfort or consent. Owen's care, his willingness to give her space even now, spoke to his character. "I appreciate that," she said. "But you do not need to treat me like I might break. I am stronger than I look." This time Owen did smile. "I am beginning to understand that." They spent the rest of the afternoon settling into an uncertain domesticity. Grace explored the house more thoroughly, finding the root cellar stocked with potatoes, carrots, onions, and apples. The bedroom held a large bed with a beautiful quilt, a dresser, a washstand, and a chair by the window. Her carpetbag looked small and lonely on the bed, her few possessions dwarfed by the space. She unpacked slowly, putting her extra dress and nightgown in the dresser, setting out her brush and mirror, hanging her mother's cameo on a nail by the mirror. Small acts of claiming this space as her own. When she emerged, Owen was stoking the fire, his movements practiced. "Are you hungry? I have venison stew in the pot. I am not much of a cook, but I can make a few basic things." "I am happy to cook," Grace said. "That was part of our agreement, not today." Owen straightened. "Today you should rest. You have traveled far, and this has been an overwhelming few days." Grace wanted to argue, but exhaustion suddenly swamped her. The journey, the stress, the wedding, all of it caught up at once. "Perhaps you are right." They ate Owen's venison stew, which was better than he had implied, along with bread from the general store. They talked carefully, skirting around the significant topics, staying with safe subjects like the weather and the layout of the town. Grace felt the growing tension as the light outside faded, as the inevitable approach of bedtime drew nearer. Finally, Owen stood and began banking the fire. "It is getting late," Grace's heart hammered. "Yes." Owen turned to face her. "Grace, I meant what I said earlier. I will not force anything. We can simply sleep. There is no rush." Part of Grace wanted to accept that offer, to delay the intimacy that still felt overwhelming with this near stranger. But another part knew that delay would only make it worse, would only increase the anxiety. Better to move forward, to begin building whatever their marriage would become. "I am your wife," she said quietly. "I understand my duties." Owen crossed to her in 3 long strides. His hands settled on her shoulders, gentle but firm. "Grace, look at me." She met his eyes, seeing intensity there that made her breath catch. "This is not a duty," he said, his voice low. "At least, I hope it will not always be just that. I will not lie and say I do not want you, but I want you willing, not resigned. Can you understand the difference?" Grace felt something shift inside her chest. In all her anxious imaginings about this moment, She had not expected this. She had expected demand, perhaps roughness tempered by a veneer of courtesy. She had not expected Owen to care about her willingness, her actual desire. "I am willing," she said, and realized it was true. "I am nervous, but I am willing." Owen's thumb traced her jaw, a feather-light touch. "I will be gentle, I promise." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, and kissed her. This kiss was deeper than the one in the church, more searching. Grace's hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fabric, the strong beat of his heart. Heat spread through her, unfamiliar but not unpleasant. Owen pulled back slightly, his breathing uneven. "Come to bed." In the bedroom, lit only by moonlight reflecting off snow, they undressed with nervous fingers. Owen turned away to give Grace privacy, and she was grateful for the courtesy as she fumbled out of her dress and into her nightgown. When she slipped between the cool sheets, Owen joined her, and she could feel the warmth of his body even though they were not quite touching. He turned to face her, his hand finding hers beneath the covers. "I am glad you came, Grace. I am glad you are here." "I am glad too," Grace whispered, and meant it. What followed was tentative, gentle, sometimes awkward but never harsh. Owen kept his promise, taking his time, checking on her comfort. Grace felt vulnerable but not unsafe, uncertain but not afraid. When it was over, Owen held her close, his hand stroking her hair, and Grace felt tears sting her eyes for reasons she could not quite name. "Are you all right?" Owen asked, concern in his voice. "Yes," Grace said. I did not expect kindness." Owen's arms tightened around her. "What kind of men have you known?" "Not many," Grace admitted, "but the ones I did know were not particularly kind." "Then they were fools." Owen kissed the top of her head. "Sleep now, you are safe here." Grace closed her eyes, her head resting on Owen's chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. She was married, lying in bed with a man she barely knew, in a town 2,000 miles from everything familiar. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt a fragile sense of peace. The days that followed developed their own rhythm. Grace rose early to make breakfast, learning the quirks of the stove and the limitations of their supplies. Owen ate whatever she made without complaint, even when she misjudged the heat and burned the biscuits. He left each morning to make his rounds of the town, checking in with business owners, settling the occasional dispute, ensuring everything remained peaceful. Grace spent her first days exploring Hecla properly. The town was small enough to walk end to end in 20 minutes, consisting of one main street with various businesses and 2 side streets with houses. There was a general store run by a taciturn man named Mr. Hayes and his cheerful wife Martha. A saloon that seemed relatively respectable, at least during daylight hours. A blacksmith, a livery, a doctor's office, and the schoolhouse. Miss Harmon proved to be a young woman of 20 with blonde hair and a warm smile. "Oh, I am so happy to meet you," she said when Grace introduced herself. "Owen mentioned you had experience teaching. Would you truly be interested in helping?" "Very much so," Grace said. "Wonderful. I have 18 students ranging from 6 to 14. It is quite a challenge managing all the different levels. If you could work with the younger children while I focused on the older ones, it would be tremendously helpful." They agreed that Grace would begin helping 3 days a week, and Grace felt a surge of satisfaction. She would have something of her own here, something beyond just being Owen's wife. She also began meeting the other women in town. Mrs. Patterson introduced her around, and while some were reserved, most were welcoming. They were curious about her, about Boston, about how she had come to marry Owen. Grace answered their questions carefully, revealing only what felt safe. The evenings became her favorite time. Owen would return home as the light faded, stamping snow from his boots, bringing with him the cold and the smell of outdoors. Grace would have dinner ready, and they would sit together at the small table, talking about their days. Owen told her about the people in town, their histories and quirks. Grace shared stories about the children at school, about her conversations with Martha Hayes or Mrs. Patterson. At night, they shared the big bed, and gradually the intimacy between them grew less awkward, more natural. Owen was an attentive lover, learning what Grace liked, always making sure she found pleasure as well. Grace found herself looking forward to those quiet hours in the dark, when Owen's hands and lips made her feel things she had not known she was capable of feeling. 3 weeks after their wedding, a warm spell came through, melting some of the snow and turning the streets to mud. Owen came home one evening looking troubled, and Grace felt a flicker of worry. "What is wrong?" she asked as she set dinner on the table. Owen pulled off his coat and hung it carefully. "There have been some thefts. Tools from the blacksmith, supplies from the general store, food from the boarding house. Small things, but consistent. You know who is responsible. I have suspicions." Owen sat heavily. "There is a group of miners who lost their jobs when the Silver Bell mine closed last month. They are struggling, running out of money. I think some of them are stealing to survive." "That is understandable, is it not?" Grace said. "If they are desperate, understandable, yes, but still illegal." Owen rubbed his face tiredly. "I have a job to do, Grace. I have to uphold the law, even when I sympathize with those breaking it." Grace heard the frustration in his voice and understood. "What will you do?" "Try to find a solution that does not involve arresting starving men." Owen looked up at her. "But I do not know what that solution is yet." Over the next few days, Owen worked long hours, meeting with the mine owners, the merchants, the mayor. Grace watched him grow more tense, the worry lines deepening around his eyes. She wished she could help but did not know how. Then one evening, an idea came to her. She found Owen in his small office, surrounded by papers. "What if the merchants agreed to hire the miners for odd jobs?" she suggested. "Repairs, hauling, whatever needs doing. It would give the miners income and solve the problem without anyone going to jail." Owen looked at her, surprise and something like admiration in his eyes. That might actually work, and perhaps the church could organize donations, food, supplies. Not charity, but a community helping itself through hard times. "Grace Ellis, you are brilliant." Owen stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly. "I will talk to the merchants tomorrow and to Reverend Miller." His plan, largely based on Grace's suggestions, worked better than anyone had expected. The merchants agreed to the arrangement, the church organized donations, and the thefts stopped. The miners, grateful for the opportunity to work honestly, proved to be valuable additions to the community. Several were eventually hired permanently. Owen's regard for Grace seemed to deepen after that. She caught him watching her with a warmth that made her heart flutter. He started seeking her opinion on other matters, treating her as a true partner rather than just a wife to be provided for. Grace found herself falling into love without quite realizing it was happening. It was in the small things. The way Owen always made sure the house was warm before she woke. How he brought her wildflowers when the first spring blooms appeared in sheltered spots. The careful attention he paid when she talked, like her words truly mattered to him. One evening in late March, as they sat together on the sofa near the fire, Grace leaned her head on Owen's shoulder and felt a surge of contentment so strong it almost frightened her. "I am happy," she said, surprising herself by speaking the thought aloud. Owen's arm came around her, pulling her closer. "So am I." "I did not expect this," Grace continued. "When I agreed to come here, I hoped for safety and security. I did not expect to actually be happy." "Neither did I." Owen's voice was quiet. "After I lost my family, I did not think I would ever feel this way again." Grace turned to look up at him. "You have never told me what happened." Owen was silent for a long moment, and Grace thought he might not answer. Then he took a deep breath. "I had a wife and a daughter in Kansas, Sarah and Emma. Emma was 3 years old, all curls and laughter. Sarah was the kindest woman I ever knew." The past tense struck Grace like a blow. "What happened to them?" "Cholera. It swept through our town one summer. They died within a week of each other. I could not save them. I could not do anything but watch them suffer." Owen's voice was flat, stripped of emotion, but Grace could feel the old pain radiating from him. "After they were buried, I could not stay there. Everything reminded me of them. So I came here, started over. I thought I would just exist, do my job, get through the days. I did not expect to feel anything again." "Oh, Owen." Grace turned fully, taking his face in her hands. She saw the grief in his eyes, old but still present, and her heart ached for him. "I am so sorry. I need you to know that I do not see you as a replacement," Owen said urgently. "You are not Sarah. What we have is different, but it is real. I care for you, Grace, deeply." "I know." Grace kissed him gently. "I care for you too, deeply." That night, their lovemaking had a tenderness to it that went beyond physical pleasure. Grace felt like they were truly joined, not just in body but in spirit. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, she whispered, "I love you." She felt Owen go still. Then his arms tightened around her almost painfully. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough. "I did not think I would ever say those words to anyone again, but I do. I love you, Grace." Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. She had not expected to find love in this arranged marriage. She had hoped only for security and respect. But here, in this small Montana town, with this steady, kind man, she had found something far more precious. Spring came slowly to Hecla, the snow melting in fits and starts, revealing a landscape that was surprisingly beautiful. Grace fell in love with the mountains rising to the west, their peaks still snow-capped even as wildflowers bloomed in the valleys. She loved the huge sky, the way it seemed to go on forever, so different from the crowded streets of Boston. Her work at the school expanded. When Miss Harmon married her rancher in April and moved to his spread 20 miles away, Grace took over teaching entirely. She loved the work, loved watching children's faces light up when they mastered a new skill. Owen built shelves for the schoolhouse and repaired the windows, and Grace felt a swell of pride watching him work. Their life together settled into a comfortable pattern. They had their disagreements, of course. Grace thought Owen took too many risks in his work as marshal. Owen thought Grace pushed herself too hard, working at school all day and then coming home to cook and clean. But they learned to talk through their conflicts, to compromise and understand each other's perspectives. In May, Grace realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited a week, then two, not wanting to say anything until she was certain. But when the signs became unmistakable, she knew she needed to tell Owen. She chose a quiet evening when Owen was relaxed, the two of them sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. "Owen, I have something to tell you." He turned to her, immediately attentive. "What is it?" "I am with child." Owen's eyes widened, his face cycling through shock, wonder, and joy so quickly Grace almost laughed. "Truly, truly. I am about 2 months along, I think." Owen stood and pulled her to her feet, wrapping her in his arms. "Grace, this is wonderful. Are you happy?" "I am," she said, and realized it was completely true. 6 months ago, the thought of bearing a child would have terrified her. But now, with Owen in their home, she felt only joy and anticipation. "Are you?" "More than I can say." Owen pulled back to look at her, his hand coming to rest gently on her still flat stomach. A baby, our baby. But then Grace saw worry cloud his eyes and she understood. Owen, this baby is ours. This will be different, I know. But his hand trembled slightly. I just cannot bear the thought of losing someone else I love. Grace covered his hand with hers. We will be careful. Doc Brennan is a good physician. I am young and healthy, and you will not lose me. I am too stubborn. Owen managed to smile at that. Yes, you are. Over the following months, as Grace's body changed and grew round with their child, Owen became almost comically protective. He did not want her lifting anything heavy, did not want her walking too far, worried constantly about her health. Grace found it both endearing and frustrating. I am pregnant, not made of glass, she said one day in August when Owen tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. I know, I am sorry, I am just terrified, Grace finished gently. I understand, but you need to trust me and trust that everything will be all right. Owen tried. Grace could see the effort it took him, but he tried. He still hovered, but he backed off when she insisted she was fine. And Grace learned to recognize when his worry became too much, when he needed reassurance that she was healthy and safe. The women in town rallied around Grace as her due date approached. They organized a gathering where they brought gifts for the baby, tiny clothes and blankets and rattles. Mrs. Patterson had knitted a beautiful blue and yellow blanket. Martha Hayes brought a carved wooden cradle her husband had made. Grace felt overwhelmed by the generosity of these women who had been strangers only months ago. You are one of us now, Mrs. Patterson said, hugging her. We take care of our own. In late October, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Grace felt the first pains. She was in the schoolhouse, dismissing the children for the day when the contraction seized her. She gripped her desk, breathing through it, and when it passed, she sent one of the older boys to fetch Owen. He arrived at a run, his face pale. Is it time? I think so. Grace tried to smile reassuringly, but another contraction hit, stronger this time. Owen got her home and sent for Doc Brennan and Mrs. Patterson. Then he hovered anxiously while Mrs. Patterson took charge, getting Grace into bed, examining her, declaring that everything looked normal. This will take a while, Mrs. Patterson said. First babies usually do. Owen, you should wait in the other room. I want to stay, Owen said. Owen, Grace started. Please. He took her hand. I need to be here. Grace looked at his face and saw the fear there, the memories of losing his first wife and daughter. She squeezed his hand. Stay. It was a long labor. Doc Brennan checked on Grace periodically, pronouncing everything normal but slow. Mrs. Patterson kept Grace as comfortable as possible, wiping her face with cool cloths, helping her walk when the movement eased the pain. And Owen stayed at her side, holding her hand, murmuring encouragement, his face etched with worry. As the hours stretched on and the pain intensified, Grace began to understand Owen's fear. This was hard, harder than she had expected, and there was no way out but through. But she focused on Owen's face, on his steady presence, and kept going. Finally, as dawn light began to color the sky, Doc Brennan said, "It is time to push." The next minutes were a blur of pain and effort and encouragement. Then suddenly there was release, and the sharp cry of a newborn filled the room. A boy, Doc Brennan announced, holding up a red-faced, squalling infant. A healthy boy. He placed the baby in Grace's arms, and she looked down at the tiny, perfect face. Her son. Their son. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Owen, she whispered. Owen was crying too, unashamedly, his hand trembling as he touched the baby's head. He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Grace. Thank you. They named him Oliver after Owen's father. He was a good baby, calm and easy, and Grace recovered quickly from the birth. Owen was besotted with his son, spending hours just watching him sleep, holding him, talking to him in a soft voice Grace had never heard him use before. "I never thought I would have this again," Owen said one night as they lay in bed with Oliver sleeping in the cradle beside them. "I thought that part of my life was over, but you gave it back to me. You gave me a family again." Grace rolled to face him. "We gave each other a family. I had nothing when I came here, Owen. I was running away from a life I could not bear. You gave me a home, security, respect, and love. So much love." Owen kissed her softly. "I still cannot quite believe you are mine." "I am yours," Grace confirmed, "and you are mine. Forever." The first winter with Oliver was challenging but joyful. Grace did not return to teaching, instead focusing on caring for their son. She did not mind. The school board found a new teacher, a young man from Denver, and Grace was content to stay home. As Oliver grew, his personality emerged. He was a happy child, quick to smile, fascinated by everything around him. He had Owen's blue eyes and Grace's darker hair, and the combination was striking. In the spring, when Oliver was 6 months old, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. Owen was thrilled, though Grace could see the worry return to his eyes. But this pregnancy was easier than the first, and she carried the baby with confidence. Their second son, Oscar, was born in December, arriving quickly and easily compared to Oliver's difficult entry into the world. He was louder than his brother, more demanding but equally loved. 2 boys. Grace watched Owen with their sons and felt her heart overflow with love. He was an attentive father, patient and playful, teaching them as they grew, supporting them through failures and celebrating their successes. The years passed in a blur of ordinary moments that Grace treasured. First steps and first words, skinned knees and childhood illnesses, school plays and fishing trips. Owen remained Marshal of Hecla, respected and valued by the community. Grace returned to teaching part-time once the boys were older, loving the work but always making sure her family came first. They had challenges, of course. The winters were brutally hard. Money was sometimes tight. Owen broke his leg badly one year dealing with a horse thief, and Grace nursed him through months of recovery. Oscar caught pneumonia at age 5, and they spent terrifying days wondering if they would lose him, but he recovered. Through it all, their love for each other deepened and matured. The passionate intensity of early love settled into something steadier but no less profound. They knew each other's flaws and loved despite them, or perhaps because of them. They learned to work as a team, to support each other through the hard times and celebrate together during the good. On their 10th anniversary, Owen took Grace back to the spot where she had arrived on that snowy January day. It was summer now, warm and bright, the town prosperous and growing. "You ever regret it?" Owen asked. "Coming here, marrying a stranger?" Grace looked at him, at the man who had become the center of her world. His hair was touched with gray now, lines etched deeper around his eyes. But he was still solid, still steady, still the man who had waited in the cold for her. "Never," she said firmly. "It was the best decision I ever made." Owen pulled her close. "I love you, Grace Ellis. I have loved you since the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, though I did not realize it at the time. I love you too. I always will." They stood together in the sunshine, looking back at the house where their sons played in the yard, where their life together had unfolded. Grace thought about the terrified woman she had been, fleeing a life she could not endure, hoping only for survival. She had found so much more. She had found home. She had found love. She had found herself. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. Oliver grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who loved books and eventually went to study law in Helena. Oscar was more adventurous, restless like his father had been at that age, working as a ranch hand and talking about seeing more of the territory. Grace and Owen weathered it all together. When Owen finally retired as marshal at 55, he took up ranching on a small spread outside town. Grace continued teaching until her late 50s, mentoring younger teachers and watching generations of children pass through her classroom. They grew old together, their hair silvering, their steps slower but their hands still reaching for each other in the night. They welcomed grandchildren, Oliver's daughter Emma, named for Owen's first child, and Oscar's twin boys. Grace held these babies and marveled at the continuation of their love in new generations. On a quiet evening in autumn, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains they had watched for 40 years, Owen took Grace's hand. "I have been thinking," he said, "about that day you arrived. The storm, the cold, how terrified you looked stepping off that stage." "I was terrified," Grace admitted. "I had no idea what I was walking into." "I have been waiting in the cold for you," Owen quoted his own words from that day. "I meant it literally then, but looking back, I think I had been waiting for you longer than I knew. Waiting for someone to bring light back into my life." Grace felt tears sting her eyes. After all these years, Owen could still move her to tears with his words. "And you were waiting for me too, though neither of us realized it. I came here looking for safety. I found everything." "We are lucky," Owen said softly. "We are blessed," Grace corrected. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, two people who had started as strangers and built a life of love and meaning together. Grace thought about all the years behind them, all the moments both monumental and mundane that had woven together to create their story. She had arrived in a snowstorm, desperate and afraid. Owen had waited in the cold for her, lonely and uncertain. But together they had built warmth, had created light in the darkness. They had built a family, a home, a love that had lasted through everything. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Grace rested her head on Owen's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her automatically. This was home. This was love. This was exactly where she was meant to be, and she had never been happier. Years later, when Oliver returned home with his family for Christmas, he found his parents in that same spot on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets, watching snow fall softly over the mountains. "You too will freeze out here," he chided gently. Owen and Grace exchanged a look, and Grace smiled. "We have spent many evenings in the cold together. It holds no fear for us anymore." Oliver shook his head but smiled. He had grown up watching his parents love, understanding that what they had was rare and precious. He hoped he could build something similar with his own wife. Inside, the house was warm and bright, filled with the sounds of grandchildren playing, Oscar arguing good-naturedly with his brother, food cooking in the kitchen. This was what Grace and Owen had built, not just a house or a family, but a legacy of love. Later that evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Grace and Owen lay together in the darkness. Their bed was the same one they had shared for 45 years, though they had replaced the mattress several times. The house had been expanded and improved, but it was still fundamentally the same small structure where they had begun their life together. "Are you happy, Grace?" Owen asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "Every day," Grace answered truthfully. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." Owen's hand found hers beneath the quilts. "I waited in the cold for you, and you brought me back to life. You gave me more than I deserved." "We gave each other everything we needed," Grace said. "That was the miracle of it. We were both broken in our own ways, and we healed each other." "I love you," Owen whispered. "I love you too. Always." They drifted into sleep, hands still clasped, two people who had taken a desperate chance on each other and found everything they had been searching for. Outside, Snow continued to fall softly, blanketing the town of Hecla in white, just as it had on the day Grace arrived all those years ago. But now, instead of fear and uncertainty, there was only peace, contentment, and a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. The next morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight glittering off fresh snow. Grace woke before Owen, as she usually did, and lay quietly watching him sleep. His face was deeply lined now, his hair white, but she still saw the man who had waited for her in the cold, who had been patient and kind when he could have been demanding, who had loved her with such steadiness and devotion. She thought about the letter she had sent to her mother years ago, describing her new life, trying to explain how she had found happiness in such an unexpected place. Her mother had visited twice before she passed, and she had been able to see for herself what Grace and Owen had built together. "You chose well," her mother had said during her second visit, watching Owen teach Oliver to ride. "Better than I could have chosen for you," Grace had agreed. She had chosen well, though at the time it had felt more like desperation than choice. But perhaps that was what faith was, stepping forward into the unknown and trusting that somehow it would work out. Owen stirred beside her, his eyes opening. When he saw her watching him, he smiled. "Good morning, love." "Good morning." Grace leaned over to kiss him gently. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Owen asked, reaching up to tuck a strand of silver hair behind her ear. "About how far we have come. About how grateful I am." "I am the grateful one," Owen said. "You took a chance on me, came all this way, built a life with a stranger." "You took a chance too," Grace pointed out. "You could have ended up with anyone, someone selfish or cruel or simply incompatible." "But I got you," Owen said, pulling her close. "I got perfect." "I am far from perfect, perfect for me," Owen clarified. From the other rooms they heard the household beginning to stir. Grandchildren laughing, Oscar's voice calling for his sons, the sounds of a family gathering for Christmas morning. "We should get up," Grace said reluctantly. "One more minute," Owen requested, holding her tighter. "Let me hold my wife for one more minute before the chaos begins." Grace settled back into his embrace, utterly content. This was everything she had never dared to dream of during those dark days in Boston. This warmth, this love, this sense of belonging completely to and with another person. "I would do it all again," she said suddenly. "Every hard moment, every challenge, I would do it all again to end up exactly here." "So would I," Owen agreed. "Every moment, good and bad, led us to this. I would not change a single thing." Finally, they rose and dressed, joining their family in the main room. Oliver had the fire blazing, and Oscar was helping his mother-in-law prepare breakfast. The grandchildren were examining the small packages under the tree, though they knew they had to wait until after breakfast to open them. Grace stood in the doorway, taking it all in. This was her legacy. Not just her sons, but the grandchildren they were raising, the values of love and steadiness and faith that would pass down through generations. This was what she and Owen had created together. Owen came to stand beside her, his arm sliding around her waist. "Quite a crew we have, isn't it?" "The best crew imaginable," Grace agreed. Emma, Oliver's daughter, noticed them standing together and smiled. At 16, she was becoming a beautiful young woman, thoughtful and kind like her father. "You two are always standing together like that," she observed. "Papa says you have been doing it since the day you got married." "It is a good place to stand," Owen said, pulling Grace a little closer. "Next to the person you love most in the world." "Grandpa, tell us the story," Emma requested. "About how you and Grandma met." It was a request they heard often from the grandchildren, and Grace never tired of telling it. She and Owen took turns, describing that snowy day when she had arrived in Hecla, terrified and uncertain, and Owen had been waiting. "I have been waiting in the cold for you." Owen quoted his own words again, just as he always did when telling the story. "And when I saw her step down from that stagecoach, I knew my waiting was over." "Even though you did not know her?" Emma asked, enchanted as always by the romance of it. "Especially because I did not know her," Owen said. "I took a leap of faith. We both did. And it was the best decision of my life." Grace reached over to squeeze his hand. "Mine too." The day unfolded with the warm chaos of family. A huge breakfast, presents exchanged with laughter and exclamations. Oscar's boys racing around with their new toys while Emma read quietly in the corner from her new book. Grace cooked Christmas dinner with help from her daughters-in-law, women she had come to love like the daughters she had never had. As evening fell, and the family gathered around the table, Owen stood to say grace. But before he began the traditional prayer, he looked around at the faces of his family, then let his gaze rest on Grace. "I am grateful for many things," he said. "For this food, for this home, for my sons and their families. But most of all, I am grateful for my wife, Grace. 45 years ago, she took a leap of faith and came to this wild territory to marry a stranger. She could have turned back 100 times. She could have regretted her choice. But she stayed, and she built this life with me. Everything good in my life flows from that one brave decision she made." Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks as Owen continued. "She taught me that hearts can heal, that love can bloom even from the most practical of arrangements, that the best things in life are often found in the most unexpected places. So, Grace, in front of our family, I want to thank you for coming to Hecla in a snowstorm, for marrying me, for loving me, for giving me this family, this life, this happiness. You are the greatest blessing I have ever known." There was not a dry eye at the table when Owen finished. Grace rose and went to him, and he wrapped her in his arms while their family looked on. "I love you," Grace whispered against his chest. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Owen replied. "My mail-order bride who became the love of my life." They ate dinner together, the family Grace and Owen had created, surrounded by warmth and laughter and love. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady, blanketing Hecla in white. But inside, there was only light and warmth and the absolute certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. As the evening wound down and family members began preparing for bed, Grace stepped outside onto the porch. The snow was falling more heavily now, reminiscent of that first night she had arrived. She heard the door open behind her and felt Owen's coat settle over her shoulders. "You will catch cold," he chided gently, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I wanted to see the snow," Grace said. "It reminds me of that first night. Yes, I was so frightened, Owen. I had no idea what kind of man you would be, what kind of life I was stepping into. I just knew I could not stay where I was." "And now?" Owen asked. Grace turned in his arms to face him. "Now I cannot imagine any other life. This is home. You are home. Everything I have ever wanted or needed is right here." Owen cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, slow and sweet and full of all the years they had shared. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Come inside before you freeze," Grace said, echoing his earlier words. "I have spent many years in the cold," Owen said, his eyes twinkling. "But with you beside me, I have never felt warmer." They went inside together, closing the door on the snowy night. The house was quiet now, everyone else asleep. Grace and Owen moved through their evening routine with the ease of long practice, each knowing where the other would be, what they would need. In bed, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the quilts Grace's grandmother had made, they talked quietly about the day, about their family, about plans for tomorrow. It was ordinary and perfect. exactly what they had built together over 45 years. "Grace," Owen said as they were drifting toward sleep. "Yes. Thank you for coming to me in that snowstorm. Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving me." Grace smiled in the darkness. "Thank you for waiting in the cold for me. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for teaching me what love could be." They fell asleep, still holding each other. Two people who had taken the greatest risk of their lives and won everything they had never dared to hope for. The years that followed brought more joy and some sorrow. They lost friends to age and illness. They saw their grandchildren grow and begin families of their own. They watched Hecla change and grow, becoming more modern while still maintaining its essential character. Through it all, Grace and Owen remained each other's constant. They grew frailer with age, needing more help, moving more slowly. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, distilled down to its purest essence. On a spring morning in their 62nd year of marriage, Grace woke to find Owen watching her with an expression of such tender love it took her breath away. "What is it?" she asked. "I was just thinking how beautiful you are," Owen said. "How lucky I am." Grace laughed, a sound like music even at 86 years old. "I am old and wrinkled and gray." "You are perfect," Owen insisted. "Just as perfect as the day you stepped off that stagecoach." "You are a terrible liar," Grace said affectionately, "but I love you for it." "I am not lying," Owen protested. "Grace, you have been beautiful every day of the 62 years I have known you. Your beauty has nothing to do with youth or smooth skin. It is in your kindness, your strength, your capacity for love. That beauty has only grown over the years." Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. After all this time, Owen could still move her to tears with his words. "What did I do to deserve you? You got on a stagecoach and trusted a stranger," Owen said. "You took a leap of faith, and I will be grateful for that leap every day of my life." They spent that morning as they spent most mornings now, sitting together on their porch, watching the world wake up around them. Hecla had changed dramatically from the small mining town where Grace had arrived so long ago. It was larger now, more prosperous with better roads and more modern conveniences. But the mountains were still the same, rising majestically to the west, and the sky was still impossibly vast. "No regrets?" Owen asked, as he often did. "Not a single one," Grace answered, as she always did. "You?" "Only that we did not have more time," Owen said. "But even that is greedy. We have had more than most people ever get." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. They had been given a gift, she knew, not just the length of their marriage, but its quality. They had built something rare and precious, something that would echo through their descendants for generations to come. When Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 months later, Grace mourned deeply, but with gratitude rather than bitterness. They had been given 62 years together, years filled with love and laughter and purpose. Not many people could say that. At the funeral, attended by what seemed like half of Montana, Oliver spoke about his father's dedication to justice and family. Oscar spoke about his father's strength and gentleness. But it was Emma, now married with children of her own, who spoke about what Grace and Owen's love had meant. "My grandparents showed us all what love could be," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "They started as strangers brought together by circumstance, but they chose every day to love each other, to support each other, to build something beautiful together. They taught us that love is not just a feeling but a decision, an action, a commitment renewed every single day." Grandpa waited in the cold for Grandma, and she came to him through a snowstorm. And from that unlikely beginning, they created a love story for the ages. Grace sat in the front row, surrounded by her sons and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and felt Owen's presence as clearly as if he were sitting beside her. He was gone, but what they had built together remained. It lived on in their descendants, in the values they had instilled, in the love they had modeled. After the funeral, as people were leaving, young Emma came to sit beside Grace. "Grandma, are you all right?" Grace smiled through her tears. "I am sad, sweetheart. I will miss your grandfather terribly, but I am also grateful. We had something special, something not everyone gets, and I have all of you, his legacy and mine." "Tell me the story again," Emma requested, "about the snowstorm." So Grace told it one more time, the story she had told countless times over the years. About the terrified young woman who had traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger. About the man who had waited in the cold for her, patient and kind. About how they had taken a leap of faith and built a love that had lasted a lifetime. "I have been waiting in the cold for you," Grace quoted Owen's words, and even now they made her heart ache. He meant it as a simple statement of fact, but it became so much more than that. "He waited for me and I came to him, and together we found everything we had been searching for." Emma hugged her grandmother tightly. "That is the most beautiful love story I have ever heard." "It was beautiful," Grace agreed, "and it was real. That is what made it so special." Grace lived for 3 more years after Owen passed, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. She spent her final years surrounded by family, telling stories, imparting wisdom, loving fiercely. When she finally passed away peacefully at 89, it was with Owen's name on her lips and a smile on her face. They buried her next to Owen in the Hecla Cemetery, under the shade of a large pine tree with a view of the mountains they had both loved. The headstone bore a simple inscription: "Owen Ellis and Grace Ellis, he waited in the cold. She came through the storm. Together they found home." The family gathered afterward at the house that Owen had built and Grace had made into a home. Oliver stood on the porch where his parents had spent so many evenings together, looking out at the mountains. "They had something special, did they not?" Oscar said, coming to stand beside his brother. "They did," Oliver agreed. "Against all odds, they found real love. They showed us what was possible." "I hope I can build something half as good with my wife," Oscar said. "We all do," Oliver replied. "That is their legacy, not just showing us what love can be, but inspiring us to seek it ourselves, to nurture it, to make it last." The family stayed together through the evening, sharing stories about Grace and Owen, laughing and crying, celebrating 2 lives well lived and a love that had transcended its humble beginnings to become something extraordinary. As night fell and stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, Emma stood on the porch where her grandparents had stood so many times. She thought about Grace arriving in a snowstorm, frightened and desperate. She thought about Owen waiting in the cold, lonely and uncertain. She thought about how they had both taken that leap of faith and built something beautiful. It was a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth aspiring to. A story of courage and hope and love that endured. A story that proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, that love can bloom even in the coldest winters, and that faith, when combined with commitment and care, can create miracles. The wind rustled through the pine trees, carrying with it the scent of distant snow. Emma smiled, feeling her grandparents' presence in the peaceful evening. They were together again, she was certain of it. Together wherever they were, just as they had been for 62 years on Earth. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, if you listened carefully, you might hear the echo of Owen's voice. "I have been waiting in the cold for you," and Grace's answer, "And I came through the storm to find you." A love story for the ages, born in a snowstorm, nurtured through faith, and lasting for eternity.